Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Frank Portinari, the podcast that gains access to real and inspiring people. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd just like to make a few announcements. I'd like to thank all those who continue to support the podcast and leave comments, likes, etc. And obviously those that subscribe. And if more of you could subscribe, that would be very much appreciated. I'd like to thank Matt the Hat Media, who gives us technical advice and support. If anybody would like to have a discussion about some sponsorship, please contact us. But equally, we'd like to do some good as well. So if anybody would like us to mention any charitable events that are coming up, as long as you give us enough warning, we'll gladly do that. And today, we're supporting the Alzheimer's Society, hence the shirt. And we'd just like to give some recognition to the great work that they do for both victims and their families. So let's get down to business and let's introduce today's guest. And today's guest is Joe. Joe Berry, I should call you by your full name. And Joe is the founder of Building Bridges for Peace. I've been trying to talk to Joe for some time, very much looking forward to hearing her story, all the great work that she's doing. So Joe, welcome to Frankly Speaking.
Thank you. Wonderful to be your guest today.
Lovely. Joe, perhaps you could tell us where you grew up, please, a little bit your childhood, your family circumstances.
I started off life in South Wales, and when I was 5 or 6, my parents separated, and then I moved to London, and I was there until I became an adult, mainly living with my mum, but then also spending a lot of time with my dad and his second wife. He went on to have 2 children. My mum had 4 children, so there were always lots of children around. And one of my favourite memories of my childhood is Christmas, especially Christmas with my dad. And it was such a happy time. He used to put in so much effort to make all his 6 children really happy. And with the Christmas trees and the lights, and he'd make it very magical. So I have some lovely, lovely memories from my childhood, some very special times.
Lovely, that's good, that's good. Would you like to explain who your father was, Joe?
Yeah, so my father was a Conservative politician around the time when Margaret Thatcher was in power. I think when he started being an MP, it was Edward Heath who was in power. And he was an MP in North London in Southgate and Enfield. And in 1984, he was staying at the Grand Hotel in Brighton. He moved to the hotel the day before because the person who'd been there had left, and it was a nicer hotel than where he was staying. So he moved there with his wife and the dogs. And tragically, a bomb went off in the early hours, and he and 4 others were killed, with many, many injured, including my stepmother. And the IRA said they were responsible, I think, by the end of the day.
When did you find out that news? Was that the same day?
Yeah, I mean, I knew from sort of 5 a.m. that a bomb had gone off. And so there was a long waiting time before we got to hear. So my brother happened to live in Brighton at that time. So he was on the ground searching for Dad, searching for news, and he found my stepmother in hospital. And then eventually he was told to identify a body, which he did through a signet ring that they both had. And it was confirmed that my dad's body had been found about like 3 in the afternoon, I think.
Oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a long time ago. I was 27. But, you know, things like this, and I'm sure anyone who's listening understands, you know, it. So you don't forget days like that.
No, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. I need to ask you this, if I'm going to be honest. Was there anger on your part? Did you feel anger at the time?
No, not then. So I absolutely adored my father, and we were really close, even though we had different views about many things and had a very different kind of lifestyle. So there was the loss of my dad, but also there was how he was killed was really important to me. And for the first time, I felt part of a conflict. I felt part of a war. Before that, I lived in peacetime, and I did grow up with bomb scares and bombs going up in London, but I always thought it was, their problems, nothing to do with me. I felt safe. I lived in peacetime. That bomb took that away, because now I felt part of a war. And so it would have been 2 days later, I decided to find a way to bring something positive out of it. And I even said, I want to understand those who killed my father. So that was my first thought, not anger.
Right, okay. And how did you go about that, Jo?
Well, it was really hard.
Did you actually know how to go about it in the first one?
No, not a clue. No, I mean, like, this is 84. This is before the internet. This is like, and my emotional intelligence was pretty low. I didn't know what to do, how to bring something positive out of it. I didn't have a voice. I tried a few things and they didn't work. But then I had a few miracles happen, and that helped me, including sharing a taxi that I talked about with a complete random stranger. He happened to come from Belfast. So I asked him, I said, I'm on a mission, try to understand more about the IRA, because the newspapers aren't going to give me a clue, because they're just demonized, like there's no humanity in the way they share those stories. I need to know, why would someone join the IRA? Because my father's just been killed. Can you help me? And he said, well, that's not an odd question at all, because my brother, he was in the IRA and he was killed by a British soldier. So at that time we represented, this is 84, so the conflict was still going on. So we represented different sides. We could have been enemies. He could have seen that, my father, what my father represented, was responsible for what happened to his brother, and vice versa. But we chose to see each other as human beings, and we talked about our vision for a world where nobody got killed and nobody killed, and where there were no enemies, and that was what gave me the idea of building bridges, because I left that taxi and thinking, I built a bridge across the divide, and even though no one knows, I know. So that sort of set me off on a direction.
Right. Well, it's quite a big step, to say the least. So I'm not sure how much the viewers know of the story. I certainly know some of it. You decided to actually meet the man that planted that bomb.
Yeah.
How did you go about that process of making contact?
So only one person was ever sentenced for planting that bomb, and that was Patrick Magee. And in June 1999, as part of the peace process, he came out of prison. He was released early. I think if there hadn't been a peace process, he'd probably be leaving now. So it was many years before. And I remember turning on the TV, and I didn't know he was going to come out of prison. I had no idea. And because he was, in a way, the most sort of notorious terrorist we had at that time, the world's press were there, because he almost killed the British government. So I just saw him coming out of prison and all these cameras around and the world's press. And he was whisked away into a car. But I remember thinking, this isn't okay. He's got his life back. My dad can't come back. I was quite upset. But then I thought, this is for peace. This means less people are going to be killed, because it's part of the peace process. And I totally support the peace process. So I welcomed that. And then the idea sort of grew more and more about meeting him. And I was traveling quite a lot to Northern Ireland at that time, because for the first time, people who'd been affected by the Troubles who lived in England were offered support.
Right.
And so I was meeting other people who'd been bereaved. I was meeting, people, Protestants who'd been bereaved, Catholics who'd been bereaved. I actually met former IRA, former loyalist paramilitaries. It was a former British soldiers. It was a time of lots and lots of residential workshops, and as part of the peace process. And so I was immersing myself in the sort of post-conflict kind of healing. And I met people who said that they knew him. And so I kept on saying, could you introduce me? I'd like to meet him. And sometimes they'd ask me a few questions. And then I heard back maybe 3 times that, he didn't want to meet me. And because this whole journey has been about trusting and, things happen at the right time. And I thought, well, maybe it's too difficult. It's fine. There's other people I can meet. I was getting involved in some of the families of the hunger strikers. There were lots of other people to meet who represented my other, who I could build bridges with. So I was fine. And then someone else said they could arrange it. And I actually got a phone call. It was on a Friday to say that, from a friend of mine, to say that he would be in our house that evening. So there was no time to prepare.
Could I just ask you a couple of questions there? Because so at no stage did the Home Office, Northern Ireland Office, or the prison service, at no time did they inform you that he was being released?
No.
What are your thoughts on that? Would you
have
been told?
They should have.
Mm.
Yeah, they definitely should.
I think you should have been prepared. I think you should have been prepared for that. That's a personal view, yeah.
Frank, you're the only person who's ever picked that up, and I think you're right. And I've read a lot about the Good Friday Agreement, and it did seem to me, as part of the prisoners' release, families were meant to be prepared. And maybe they were in Northern Ireland. I don't know, but we certainly, none of my family knew.
Maybe I'm not making excuses for anybody, far from it. Maybe because of the distance involved, there was less likelihood, if you like, of bumping into each other, I suppose, on the same street or being in the same location. But as I say, I don't think that's an excuse. I think you should have been informed.
I think because he was a high-profile person, we should have been. But there's lots of those things. We have to let them go.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I understand that. So you went along on the Friday.
Yeah, I met him that evening, and I was quite terrified. I went on my own with no one there to support me, and looking back on it, with everything I know now about restorative processes, because I'm a facilitator, I broke all the rules, right? Which is kind of how my life is, learn by doing everything the hardest possible way. But somehow it worked. It was just him and me in a room at the back of someone's house for 3 hours, sitting on a sofa, and my intention was very clear, right? I didn't want an apology. I didn't want to blame him or get angry, because what good was that going to do? I just wanted to see him as a human being, because he was the most demonized ex-terrorist we had. I just wanted to see him, hear his story, humanize him.
Yeah.
Because that was going to help humanize me. That would give me something back. And I knew he'd come wanting to justify, because I met other men in the IRA, and I knew that they represented, as they saw it, the oppressed. They didn't have the same human rights, that he would come and share with me the suffering of his community, which he did. And so he started by sort of justifying the Brighton bomb and saying that it kind of worked because they eventually got the peace process. But while he's sharing that, I'm also asking questions and looking at him, and I had some very strange thoughts in my head at the same time. One of them was like, you don't look like my idea of a terrorist. I mean, crazy things were happening inside me, but my intention was to be present to him and to really listen. And I remember one point when he's talking about what he saw in his community in Belfast, and it was harrowing. And that's when he decided he wanted to do something to protect his community. Now, I'm never going to agree that violence ever works, and I never have and never will. But I could see at that point that he had some compassion for his community, and he was no longer this faceless enemy. He's now a human being. So that's when I thought, okay, I'm going to go now. No one ever needs to know that I've met him. This is personal, it's private, far better no one knows. And I've got what I need. And then that's when he changed. And he said to me, I don't know anymore who I am. Can I hear your pain? Can I hear your anger? What can I do for you? And that's when I realized that he'd taken off his political hat and he'd become vulnerable and was starting his journey. And so I stayed. I obviously stayed.
Mm. Well, I think at this point, I mean, I will declare an interest, for want of a better way of putting it, because as you know, I've had a loyalist paramilitary background, and have done interviews with various people, and the word that most people want you to say is sorry, and I find it's a really hollow word. It doesn't really explain the story or the journey. So I've tended to try to give explanations. And of course, the more you do that, the more you reflect, the more you question yourself, and you question circumstances. So to some degree, I can put myself on that same settee. You know, I've gone through a similar process.
Really?
I'm not sure how far he's gone, because it's a far more powerful relationship, because it was your father. It was a family member. I probably can be slightly more detached because I've never met a victim. I could possibly meet a potential victim and have a similar conversation, but certainly nothing as deep as that.
Can I ask you something? Looking back on it, did you hurt people, do you think?
My answer to that normally, when I get asked that, is, and I don't want it to come across as being blasé, I don't know. So I've never had to confront the question. So, but if somebody came to me now and said something like, well, the weapons that you supplied, as a result of that, an innocent person lost their life. And so many weeks later, his mother had a heart attack. If his wife had a nervous breakdown, his children were scarred for the rest of their lives. Well, I wouldn't feel very good, would I? No. I wouldn't feel much like a soldier, would I? I wouldn't feel much like a volunteer. But I've got the benefit of that's not happened to me. But it doesn't mean I haven't asked myself the question. It doesn't mean I haven't asked that question, which is obviously what brought it up. So I can only imagine what that conversation must have been like. And I've seen some situations, for example, Michael Stone, who where he sat and he spoke to relatives, and I can't imagine what that's like to do that. But if it was necessary, I clearly would. If it was necessary, I would sit and have that conversation. So how did that evening end up?
So it was a very different kind of conversation after that. And he was asking a lot of questions about my dad. And of course, when he planted that bomb, he wasn't seeing anyone in the hotel because he demonized them. But before he met me, he wasn't aware he'd done that. So now he's beginning to be aware that just as he's accused the other of demonizing him, he's demonized the other. And that actually he's killed a wonderful human being. And he didn't know that before he met me.
Yeah.
And that's hard for him. That's emotional. That's something that I don't think he'd been prepared for. And I mean, looking back, I think he had a lot of courage to start feeling it. It'd be much easier for him to have stayed in a very sort of safe place of detachment and righteousness and sort of the political kind of like, well, we were freedom fighters, whatever. But he didn't. He let it impact him emotionally, and I think maybe another hour and a half, and I then finished. I couldn't do it anymore. You know, I'd run out to be able to listen to him. And he then said to me, "I'm really sorry I killed your father." Now, I didn't go for the sorry, but what I got from that was his acknowledgement of my father.
Yeah.
Now, so that did mean something. It wasn't just lip service. Like, he really felt it. And I said to him something very strange, which was, "I'm so glad it's you." And he didn't know what that meant. And in a way, nor did I. But when we met 3 weeks later, he asked me, and I said, "Well, it's the fact that you did open up, and you took off the political hat." I might not use those words, you know, but like, you did start feeling it, and you became vulnerable. And I think that takes courage, you know. I mean, so, and I still think that takes courage. And so it was hard, that meeting, you know, because I really thought it was going to be a one-off. And then after the first one, I knew I needed to go back for a second one. Like, it wasn't finished. Like, I started something. Yeah. And so I went back for a second, and then a third, and then someone got involved who wanted to film it for purely for reconciliation purpose. But then he then realized this was bigger than that, and that he wanted the world to know about what was happening. Because at that time, if you think about it, it's 2000. It's, you know, the peace process has just started, you know, and there we are, two people who are in dialogue and undergoing our own reconciliation process. So I mean, I found myself a year later going public with all the implications of having to tell my family and friends and all the other families from the Grand Hotel who'd been affected, and dealing with the press, and, you know, it was huge.
How was that generally received by your family?
Well, they were all, I mean, my family are amazing. They're extraordinary, every one of them. And I think my dad would be proud of each of his 6 children. So in different degrees, you know, some people, it led to them sharing more about how they felt that day, what happened to them, you know, going back. It was just after 9/11. And of course, after 9/11 happened, everyone was so shocked, you know, it kind of, I suppose, for me, that was the point where, you know, the IRA were no longer the ones who'd hurt us. We suddenly had a new threat, and something different was happening. And everyone was, I think, very open and very shocked. And people, I mean, the documentary had incredible, people said it was amazing, absolutely amazing. It won a prize, and it did very, very well. And I also had people accuse me of betraying my father. Because there I am, rehumanizing the man who's killed him, one of the most notorious. I mean, I only use the word terrorist, that's the word, but yeah, paramilitary combatant. I don't mind, but he was the man that planted that bomb. And there I am, you know, being seen to be friendly with him. And some people find that very difficult and accuse me of betraying. You know, I've had death threats, I've had all sorts. And you know what, I understand that, because that's, you know, the nature of conflict is that each party of it thinks that they have the truth and they're right, you know, and they're not seeing the reasons why other people behave in the way they behave. So what I managed to do, so I met many people who were in the loyalist paramilitaries, and as well as in the IRA. I mean, all the different types of groups, and also that I've met the peace women, and and the RUC. I've just immersed myself with stories, you know, and I have not yet heard a story where I can't empathize and sort of think, okay, well, if I'd been born that side of Belfast, if I'd been born at that side of Belfast, you know, then at school I would have had the pressures and the people around me and the encouragement, and then I would have seen this suffering, because there was suffering caused by both sides, you know, and I could have been drawn in. So, or I might not have. But, you know, I don't really believe in sides. You know, I've seen, I don't know whether you have, but I've been in residentials where, especially the guys who've been in all the different paramilitaries and the ex-soldiers, like, they are just laughing together and drinking beer, and they've got so much in common. You know, when they take down their guns, they've actually got a lot in common, and they can share that. And so it's given me an understanding of this empathy, where actually, when we really hear people, there are no sides. There's I don't know your story, but I imagine that things happen to you, people influence. If I got to hear it all, or I've heard bits of it, I would go, well, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense that you went to do that.
Mm. Well, I'm a great admirer of the late John McMichael, and his famous saying was to the effect, "Nobody was exclusively right, and nobody was exclusively wrong." And I think if you work from that basis, it's a good start. It's a good start to say, well, now we've agreed on that. What's the next step? And I think what I personally struggle with at the moment is that the people that were combatants are more likely to want that. It's what you would call now ceasefire soldiers, if you like. People that hopefully will never know would they make that commitment, for right or wrong. Would they make? Hopefully we'll never know. Hopefully the peace will remain. But you're right, it is interesting to listen to former combatants, soldiers, as you say, the RUC, members of the UDR, etc., the prison staff, and even people that have worked in hospitals, had to deal with some of the injuries and so on. And I think once you get those around the table, and you ask the simple question, do you want to go through this all over again? I'm afraid you'd have to be some sort of lunatic, wouldn't you? You'd have to be some sort of lunatic to say, yeah, come on, let's have round two. So I can see the difficulties that people look. I'll be brutally honest. When our mutual friend Alan Stevens, suggested that we have a conversation, I was a little bit apprehensive. I wasn't sure of my own response. But I've had plenty of time to consider that and to put myself in similar shoes.
Right.
So much. I actually thought at one stage, oh my God, what if she suddenly, got Patrick Magee sitting next to her when we start the interview or the conversation? How am I going to deal with that? But would it have been a bad thing? No, not really, because as you say, there might have been a lot in common. There might have been similar attitudes to similar things.
So that was your fear. Can we just say to everyone listening that there is no way I would ever do that?
Oh, no.
Just in case they think, that's what I do. I do not do that. So this is your imagination.
Yeah, I mean, if I was writing a novel and I wanted a plot, this is that would be part of it. That would be part of the story.
So, what does Patrick Magee? What did he represent to you?
At the time of the bombing, the enemy. Just a simple word. It's too simple. I grant you, it's too simple a word to say. But yeah, just the enemy. But what I also learnt was your enemies become less discerning. You kind of make excuses. Well, what about the people that support him? Whether that's militarily, intelligence. Strategically, and then even politically, you start to see everybody as the enemy. So I can see where he would have viewed your father as the enemy until he found out different, until he spoke to you and realised he was just another human being. So when did you float the idea of the building bridges for peace?
I think we became a proper charity in 2008, but I was working on it. So after we went public, we got asked to start doing different talks. I remember the first one we were asked to give in London, and we only had a few minutes each to speak. And that's when Patrick said, I now know I could have sat down and had a cup of tea with Joe's dad, which is a very powerful thing to say. And I can imagine the two of them together having that cup of tea. But of course, the Conservative government at that time didn't have a policy of cups of tea. They weren't listening. You know, there's a lack of listening on all sides. I mean, that unfortunately that happens a lot in politics. So I guess after that, when we went public, then people kept on saying, "Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that?" And I needed then to have a sort of way to kind of support us doing that work. And there were many sort of different incarnations, and eventually the charity, so I could get funding. I created projects for us. So I got some funding for us to go to Palestine and Israel, mainly to work with the amazing group called Parent Circle Family Forum. They're bereaved families from both sides who come together, some of my dearest friends, and Combatants for Peace, who also, I think you really like the work they do. They're amazing. And we traveled all around Israel and also around Palestine. That was an amazing experience. We've also been together. We've been to Rwanda. Facebook showing me now all the memories. It must have been this time of the year, probably about 8 years ago. I can't remember. I got us to an international peace conference in Sarajevo, which was extraordinary. So I sort of helped get the funding, get us find ways for us to do the work. And then I also started developing my own work, which has actually always been very, very important. So when people hear us speak, or if I just share my story, you know, then there's always questions and answers, but then people start wanting to know more about, okay, so, you know, what can I do differently? So one of my programs is working in schools, empowering young people to be positive change makers.
Yeah. Because
I believe that, you know, a lot of young people feel anger and injustice because, you know, the world is a difficult place. You know, it is really difficult being a young person. There's real grievances. So what can they do with those grievances? And I believe that with the right intervention, they can then turn them into doing some project for their community or think about themselves as positive change maker. You know, I don't know about, I always like to know people like you and Patrick, and I've met many people who call themselves former, all sorts of things, you know, and I always ask, what is the kind of intervention that would have given you a whole nother direction, you know, in which you had found a way in your community to be a positive change maker and be a model for the younger kids, you know. And I think it's hard to prove whether any people I work with would have gone on to do anything, but, you know, we're never going to know. But I just believe, I love young people. I just like to work with them.
I think if I was to talk about rehabilitation, for example, that didn't work for me purely because there wasn't any. There was absolutely no attempt during my incarceration to question, you know, my views or my commitments. What there seemed to be one of is maybe, can we prepare this man to go back out work, you know, be a responsible citizen, etc. But I would have done that anyway because I had a family, so I had responsibility anyway. So I wouldn't call that rehabilitation. No. So I think rehabilitation for me would probably have happened more when you actually go and speak to communities. And a group that we formed did go and do exactly that. So instead of continuing to be militant and looking for confrontation, we actually went and spoke to a variety of communities. Wow. But we weren't particularly happy about because they were still being terrorised to some degree.
Which ones are?
So this was in Belgium. This was in Whitewell, for example, or White City, as they call it. The Fountain Estate in Londonderry, Clough Place in East Belfast. You know, you could pick any interface area. You know.
And what year are we talking about?
Well, that would have been late 90s, early 2000s, and it was only when we sat down in community centres and spoke to people and said, well, you know, what is your problem? What are your problems? You know, and on one occasion, somebody said, "Well, we can't go to the shops. It's too dangerous. We'll be attacked." And we came up with the idea of, well, why don't you have a shop on your estate? So we came back to London, and we had a function and raised the money for a container that was converted into a shop. So the basic amenities could be purchased on the estate. So that was probably the first time. My first option wasn't, we need to get at the people that are terrorising things. We thought, let's see if is there another way of actually assisting these people. So let's take them out of harm's way by providing that facility on their own estate. And then that snowballed. That made us look at lots of different ways we could do that. And I suppose that did start to dilute my militancy, if you like. Where it had always been the first option, it started to become the second option, and then it started to become the last option. And that's the way I tend to feel now. That's. I will say that I don't think it was so much I changed as so much circumstances changed, and I'm glad they did. And I thoroughly support those circumstances.
Yeah, and it sounded like you did change as well.
I do wonder. I do question. I sincerely hope that there's not a return. There's a dozen reasons why I personally wouldn't become involved again. But I would certainly deter young people from doing that.
So, as a young person, how old were you when you got involved?
That's a good question, actually. Probably late teens, early 20s, when I first became aware of the politics of the place. Let's put it this way, when it became personal, if you like. I knew some history. But once you know people whose relations have been imprisoned or they've been murdered or so on, it becomes more personal. Of course, London. London was the focus of Samini.
Yeah.
So, and I'm a proud Londoner, and I wanted to. There was an inevitable "you kick me, I'll kick you back" kind of attitude, So yeah, probably late 1920, I suppose. The militant side probably a little bit later than that. Again, but it was always there, I think.
So this is a hypothetical question. So what could have been in place at that time for you to not become, in your words, militant? Like, what could you? Is there anything, do you think, that if it had been there for you, you wouldn't have gone that way?
No, probably not. If I'm honest, but that's just me personally. That's my temperament. I look back on it. That's why the book, when I wrote the book, Left, Right, Loyalist, at the bottom it said from one extreme to another. Because looking back over, you have to live a life to look back over it, so to speak.
Yeah.
And everything I got involved with, I've taken to its extreme. Well, I can see that now. So I suppose, yes, the cut-off point is identifying as soon as you can that you may have that tendency. If people say they've got an addictive nature and they say smoking, drugs, gambling, well, perhaps there's other addictions that you just, no one's given a name to it. Well, I've certainly identified that in me.
Yeah.
That addictive nature. So yeah, that could be used, I suppose, as if you were talking to young people, you could give examples. I could certainly give plenty of examples of that. But you need good people around you. That you need mentors. You need people you need to hear people's stories.
Yes.
And and I agree when you talk about talking, at schools and colleges. I'm a great advocate for having forums within schools that young people can sit around and have the freedom to discuss, their concerns. and try and solve those problems within that environment, not out on the streets. Not through confrontation and violence. So, what stage are you at now, Joe? What's your current situation, projects, whatever?
Yeah, good question. So we're just coming out of lockdown. I've got a school in Tower Hamlets, Mulberry Girls' School, that I've been working virtually, and I've been to see them twice.
Right.
And been working with 13, 14-year-olds, and they wanted to do projects about kindness and resilience. And they've had a tough time. I mean, they come from the Muslim community. They've had a lot of bereavement, poverty. They do experience, even the girls, they do experience racism daily. They have a lot of reasons to have grievances. But the school's absolutely incredible. It gives them a voice. It empowers them. They're very, very bright. So I went in there to do some projects, and they chose the subjects. I never impose what I think they should do. And I'm also there to listen, because everyone needs to be listened to. So that's sort of ended now, but I'm hoping to be back in schools now that they're opening the doors. I've had to do a lot of my work on Zoom. I've been asked to take part in a peace conference in South Korea in October. And they say it could be in person, and I'm like beyond excited. Like, if that really happened, I just can't imagine what that would be like. But other than that, I'm also so I have my Building Bridges for Peace work, and I'm always giving talks and workshops and whatever I can do. But I'm also developing my work. I call it more like my brand, and I'm developing a course on conflict, because I'm a trained facilitator. I love to facilitate about everything to do with conflict and restorative processes. And one of my new courses is called Conflict is a Gift. And it's taking people through a process to find the gift and to find the skills, and to be just more resilient, really, in how to deal with conflict. And that's also about growing emotional intelligence, which I think is really important. Having not had it as a child, as a young person, I feel like I really have been developing that. So I'm not an academic. I don't do five things to forgive. I'm not like that. I'm much more I facilitate people like to take their next steps. I don't preach. Don't tell people what to do. It's more creating a space for people to find their own truth. So I do a lot of that. But with lockdown and I've also got some unknowns. I don't know. I mean, we Building Bridges of Peace is a tiny charity. Absolutely tiny, and it's really me doing the work. We don't have a huge amount of funding, so I've got some questions. Do I come September start working on projects? I really want to work in Northern Ireland, and I met someone at the weekend who's part of another charity, and she's going to be focusing on Northern Ireland, so maybe there's partnership there, which is always useful, because I feel for the young people there who've all been born since the peace process, and yet they're known for Northern Ireland, and now because of Brexit, because of the border, there's a lot of unrest, there's a lot of feelings. It's hard. So I'd love to go in and take my story there. And I also do speak with Patrick McGee. Someone wants to make a little documentary of our work as a teaching aid that could be used around the world, and that I find that very exciting, because that would be a great legacy to leave. He's published his book, and I feel slightly, not cross with myself, but a bit frustrated I didn't get my book published at the same time, my story, so I need to do it.
Well, you just robbed me of my next question.
I know.
Because I was conscious that Patrick had produced the book. So the next question was when's your book coming? If you like?
I don't know.
Right. Okay.
I don't know. I need to write it. So some of it's written, and somehow each day goes by and I'm busy and I haven't written it. So I need some accountability, and I do have people in my life who are giving me that. So it is the next project. Is my book.
Because that would certainly be a good thing for children or young people to have access to, I believe.
Yeah, I would. And it's also, a lot of people want to know more about sort of the inner process that I went to. How did I not blame him? You know, how was I not consumed by rage? How have I managed to find so many gifts of what's happened? Obviously, I never wanted my father to be killed. You know,
No.
like if you asked me to swap it, of course I would. You know, but I have made something out of it, and then people want to know how. You know, or so the book could go deeper into some of the lessons I've been learning, and you know, I'm just going to share them and offer them, and people can take what they need to take. So I need to really do this.
Yeah, I think the more people that were part of that, part of our history, you know, part of our political and social history, the more people that talk about it and give their explanation of it, and not only what they experienced at the time, what they've learned since. You know, I think that's very important, because then youngsters will get the whole picture, not the bit that someone just tells them about. You know, that they'll get a much better understanding, because there is so many more people explaining their experiences.
And the other thing, Frank, the other thing is that when people hear what I've done, they then feel they can do something in their own lives. Now they know what's possible. They go, well, if you've managed to work with a guy who killed your father, well, then I can go and do this. So they then take action for themselves because they know what's possible. And that really excites me, because it's, you know, I don't tell people, you know, you need to go and do this, but they find their own version, and it gives them almost permission to do that and to not have an enemy. And my vision for the world is huge. You know, it's a world where we empathize with everyone. We care about every single human being, and you know, we have justice for everyone, and we stop demonizing people. And that's, you know, my big aim is how can we move beyond having an enemy? And at the moment, as you know, even in England, there's a lot of division. Even in families, there can be division about how people feel about certain things. People get very, you know, very indignant and sort of very, very cross. I feel this, but where's the curiosity? So you have a different opinion. Oh, well, tell me more about that. Let's talk about it. Let's be curious and let's be kind.
I can remember my own wife when Brexit was going on, and she was, you know, in her workplace. She's a very popular person. You know, she helps people, and she works in a school, and she's loved by the children, the parents, the staff. And then all of a sudden Brexit came along, and she declared her own opinion, and she wasn't being particularly political. She wasn't campaigning. Just asked who she'd, you know, which way she'd voted, if you like. And you know, the next couple of weeks she was almost ostracised, just because she had a difference of opinion. Yet she was the same person. You know, she was the same person that they'd all loved and appreciated and respected, and just because she had a difference of opinion, suddenly it wasn't a nice. It wasn't a nice time. Yeah. No. So yeah, we do need to talk, don't we? That is the bottom line.
And listen. Talk and listen.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. I've really enjoyed listening to you today, and very much appreciate you coming on and giving your explanation of your personal circumstances, not what other people think. Your personal circumstances, and I think you've articulated that really well. Because even I wasn't sure, and obviously I've done some research, but I didn't know all the answers clearly. You know, I'm just going to make a few announcements. Could you just stay with us?
Can I just thank you?
Yes, thank you.
What I appreciate about this has been very real, because actually this is us building a bridge because of where you come from in the past and how maybe you saw me, and so it's been real. Yeah. And you've been honest. I've asked you questions as well and been vulnerable. So I've really appreciated this. So thank you, Frank.
Oh, thank you. Well, we do say, I mean, that's the criteria for coming on to the podcast, is one of, we say we want, you know, real and inspiring people. So you've certainly done that today. You've been very real and more than inspiring. So again, thanks very much. So I'm just going to make a few announcements just to finish up. Again, thanks for the assistance of Mac the Hat Media, all the people that support us. I'll stress again, I very much enjoy it. I get a lot of pleasure out of it, speaking to our guests. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. It's not a threat, that's an appeal. Thanks very much, everybody. And we'll see you again soon.